In this exercise, we'll be creating a standard pivot table in Tableau and then transforming that pivot table into a heat map to really allow us to visualize our data. Let's now connect to our retail sales Excel file. Let's drag in the orders sheet that's part of this workbook. We don't need to restructure this data in any way, so we're good to go. Let's move on to our sheet 1. Okay, let's add region into our columns shelf. Click and drag, and we'll drop it on columns. Next, we'll add order date to our rows. And finally, let's change this ABC, which is the default display when nothing is actually assigned to these particular values. Let's make these sales. So we'll take our sales measure, double click, and Tableau places that on the text. And we know it's text because there's a little T icon. So we have a standard table here. We're looking at the regional sales by year. And we also have the ability with this particular date dimension to drill downward. So if we just hover on the top of this dimension, click the plus, now we have our tabular values broken out by quarter. And you can keep on drilling all the way down, depending upon what data is available for that particular date dimension. And as you can see, this is all well and good, but it's very difficult to figure out where's the largest number out of this entire set. Is there a way to highlight that data and call it out? Because right now, you sort of get lost in the mix. And this is where the heat mapping comes into play. Let's go ahead and assign a square instead of these numbers. So let's go ahead and just get rid of sales. We'll just drop it out. And we'll change our marks to be, instead of text, a square. And right now, all these squares, they're colored blue, all the same size. So we actually have to go ahead and assign our sales measure to do something to these squares. Let's click on sales, and we'll drag and drop it onto our size mark. And this is going to allow us to actually visualize the size of our squares and how they reflect back with sales. You can see that the smallest of the squares are around 114,000, and the largest of the squares are around 411,000. So we can click and drag our visual to add a little more space here, and we can see that how Tableau automatically resizes all of our squares. Okay, so the beauty of heat maps is being able to visualize multi-dimensional analysis at the same time. And what I mean by that is, let's say I drag sales onto color. Currently, we're looking at sales on both the size of the square and the color of the square. So we're not really leveraging multi-dimensional analysis. It's single dimension analysis. If we add profit onto color, now we can see how those box colors changed because we're actually analyzing multiple dimensions simultaneously. And that's the beauty of these heat maps. So let's go ahead and just click on color, edit, and we can adjust our color palette to be another palette that's a little more meaningful. Let's try, for example, red-green diverging, and apply. Now what we're seeing is the size of our boxes represents our sales, and the color of our boxes represent the profit. So we can see here this box is decently sized. However, a lot of money was lost in the profit for this particular quarter and region. So 2013, Western region, Q3. You can immediately see that this particular piece of data, something went on here, what's going on, and then you would go into a deeper analysis to see why the profit was lower. And here we can see there's a quite large box and also a really dark green shade. So a lot of sales were made and a lot of profit was also made. Let's say you want to see these boxes to be a little bit bigger. Click on size. And if we slide this slider to the right, Tableau magnifies our boxes for us. But you don't want to go too far to the right because then they tend to overlap. So let's just go back and find a nice balance here. So now we've successfully transformed a standard pivot table into a heat map. And we're analyzing 2 dimensions instead of just a single dimension like sales. And if you want to see the numbers for each of these boxes, all you need to do is hover over. If you wanted to display the labels for these boxes, you can just show the mark labels. But as you can see, it's a little busy, so I wouldn't recommend using labels for this particular visualization. Let's rename this sheet 1 to be Pivot Heat Map. And we'll save this workbook. File, save. And you can call it whatever you'd like. I'm going to call mine Tableau Training. All right, we're all set with this unit. Let's move on and get working on the next one. In this unit, we'll demonstrate how to create a highlight table in Tableau. A highlight table is similar to a heat map, but a little different, and you'll see that in just a second. So let's create a new sheet. We'll call it Highlight Table. Let's go ahead and add in our date dimension into our columns shelf. And we'll expand out once more just so we have a quarterly view. And next we'll add region to our rows. And you'll find if you double click, Tableau will usually try to recommend where to put that particular dimension. If for any reason it doesn't show up here in the rows shelf, just go ahead and manually click and drag it right into rows. Okay, so right now we have all the ABCs, which is basically saying there's no measure values being output currently. So instead of actually displaying measure values at this point in the game, let's take profit and drop that on color. So Tableau has automatically set our mark type to be a square. We can see that the darkest blues, or we have the strongest profit, and the faintest grays and beiges, or we had the worst profit turnout. I really don't like the blue color scheme because we're looking at monetary values here. So green is obviously good, red is bad. So we'll click on color, edit, red, green diverging. Okay. So we have this really neat highlight table, but it's missing one thing, the values. So because we're displaying this data a little differently than our last one, we have space now to list out our profit values. So instead of actually taking our profit and dropping it on label, you can see what happens there. It actually just takes the values and adds some color to those. So I'll undo, and I'll come up to label here and just do show mark labels. So now we have all of our profit values for each region, for each quarter and year. And this is an example of a highlight table. Let's move on to the next unit.